I've described how our times are required an essential kind of growing up as a species, what creative systems theory calls a new cultural maturity. And I've noted that one of the best ways to appreciate cultural maturity's cognitive reordering is to examine some of the new abilities that it makes possible. I made a start in the previous episode by examining how questions of all sorts are requiring us a new, quite ultimate kind of responsibility. Here I will give attention to a second needed new capacity that cultural maturity's changes make possible, the ability to better get our minds around life's complexities and inherent uncertainties. Step back and we see how a critical function of past beliefs has been to protect us from complexity and uncertainty. The clear rules that came with culture's past parental function have protected us like children from needing to confront what otherwise would have been too much for us. And more specific ideological beliefs, whatever the sort, take a multi-hued world and reduce it to a more manageable single crayon in the systemic box. A good place to see this is with how historically we have tended to view our own kind as chosen and projected less savory parts of ourselves onto others, the dynamic that has traditionally led to war. It is reasonable to ask why we have seen this mechanism given how often it has caused us pain. The simple answer is that it has protected us from complexity and uncertainty. It has created an unquestioned sense of shared identity, absent of ambiguities, and shielded us from how big, nuanced, and multidimensional reality really is. We might similarly ask why historically we have thought about questions of all sorts in the language of polarity, masculine versus feminine, mind versus body, science versus religion. Creative systems theory describes how both the fact of polarity and the specific forms the polarity has taken over the course of history follows from how change processes and human systems inherently work. But creative systems theory also emphasizes that whenever we think in polarized terms, the way we think is protecting us from the full complexity and dynamism of all that is involved. In times past, these mechanisms have served us. But with the answers to each of the questions that I just noted, the protective mechanisms have limited, even distorted perceptions. However much these mechanisms have benefited us, our times challenge us to think in more complete ways, and that means more directly acknowledging complexity and uncertainty. This becomes most obvious when our past ways of thinking put us in danger. In today's world of increasingly available weapons of mass destruction, hiding from how big life is in chosen people, evil, other assumptions has stopped being consistent with survival. And in the social arena, if we can't get beyond today's extreme partisan political animosities, it may well be that the democratic experiment that we so cherish will come to an end. Acknowledging complexity and uncertainty will also be critical to effectively assessing risk in our increasingly risk-filled world. Failing to do so will more and more often itself put us at risk. As important, many of the most valuable new human possibilities depend on understanding in ways that better acknowledge complexity and uncertainty. I've given particular attention in my writings to how culturally mature understanding draws more consciously on the whole of intelligence multifaceted complexity, all the cognitive crayons in the systemic box. When we succeed at doing so, we encounter a specifically more creative world and one with dramatic new options, but it is also a world in which we necessarily accept the fact of complexity and uncertainty. Addressing today's crisis of purpose and learning to think in more complete ways is ultimately impossible without a willingness to more directly acknowledge complexity and uncertainty. We see important steps forward in this regard with how frequently the cutting edge of understanding our times bridges the polar assumptions of times past, as with matter and energy and physics, mind and body and medicine, leader and follower, and how we are rethinking authority, and masculine and feminine, and how we are rethinking gender. Holding polar realities in more complete ways becomes possible only to the degree we can tolerate and even celebrate the complexities and uncertainties that come part and parcel with a more systemic picture. One of the most important places we see the possibility side of the need to better tolerate complexity and uncertainty is with relationships of all sorts and how they are changing in our time. I touched on how both leadership and love are requiring more whole person, whole system kinds of bonds. Such more creative kinds of connectings become an option only to the degree we can accept greater complexity and uncertainty. Today we easily run from the significant demands that come with such greater complexity and uncertainty. But cultural maturity's changes make us more comfortable with these demands. I've described how integrative meta-perspective involves at once stepping back from and more deeply engaging the full complexity of our creative natures. If we succeed at doing so, we find our now familiar paradox. Life asks more of us, and at the same time, the result quickly comes to feel like common sense. It feels this way in part simply because this is what is now developmentally needed. These are recognitions whose time has come. But there is also a more ultimate reason. With a fullness that has not before been an option, we are better recognizing and able to get our minds around what is in fact the case, including life's very real complexities and uncertainties. As always, I invite your thoughts and questions.